Hi, everyone. You're listening to ToRAISE Questions Doula podcast, and this is Thérèse. I'm the Executive Director of To Labor, which is an international training and certifying organization for birth doulas. Hey, everyone. So today we're going to continue our conversation with Anne, a doula from Indiana that we started last week. And so I just wanted to give you that quick heads up that that's what we're listening to. And I want to thank Latch Mama for supporting us through our podcasting, and to thank all of you for your listening and your questions and your love and your comments back to us. I want to put it out there that if you are interested in attending any of our workshops, please spend some time looking at our website calendar and take a look at what we have coming up. We are still adding in workshops. I mean, it's we don't have our full schedule up yet. So if you don't see your city there, send an inquiry to laborworkshops@gmail.com. That's to Nicole, our workshop coordinator, and see if we have one planned for your community, or if it's possible that you could help us sponsor one. You could talk to Nicole about that as well. But I wanted to mention that we are having a training in Chicago in April, one in Santa Cruz at the end of April, Tulsa, Oklahoma in May, or just a couple that are coming up, and we'd love to have you attend. And if you don't live in those areas, consider traveling. We have lots of people who will take advantage of going to a workshop, and they just go wherever it happens to be. If that's possible for you, please consider one of those places. I certainly would consider Chicago as a great place to explore, or Santa Cruz, because what a gorgeous place. And of course, Tulsa, you'd be surprised what a lovely community that is as well. So take a look at our workshops and consider joining us. Also, I just want to remind you that if you have questions, to send them to us at ToRAISEQuestions@gmail.com. We don't always get back to you right away, or sometimes it's a while before we actually respond to your question. Please forgive us. If it's something that you feel is being ignored, send it again, and we will do our best to address the issues. I also, I also wanted to put it out there again that we would love questions directly sent to us from you all. Questions that we can ask Dr. Jody Brown, who was on our podcast recently. She is more than happy to answer questions from an OB perspective, from the medical perspective. So if you have questions about epidurals or internal fetal monitors or different medications, or why things are done a certain way, or you saw a doctor do this and you're wondering why, send them to us so we can set up a time to speak with Jody and get these questions answered. It's always wonderful when we can get them from a direct source, and she certainly is a great resource for us. So anyway, I'll be back in a moment to continue our conversation with Anne. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Thérèse, and I'm back with Anne, and we're going to just start talking where we left off last week.
In the area that I'm in, there's really not options for vaginal breech birth. There really are not. Not in the hospital, not out of hospital. There's just, I've heard of a midwife who has done that one time, but there's not a person who's the regular person that you can refer to for this, right? And the closest place where people go to do it is about 5 hours away.
Wow.
So immediately, it's sort of like, well, what do we do next, right? And so my client being very, like I said, she's very informed. She was like, okay. And she looks at me and she's like, well, spinning babies. We've got a rebozo. Like, what can we do? And I'm like, oh, okay. That was not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And the midwife, I'm, very thankful to her. She was like, no, that's not the situation that we're in. Your baby is already very engaged in the pelvis. It's, he's very low.
She's fully dilated.
Yeah, it's fully dilated. She's like, this is not we can try to flip him or something like that. That's not, that's not where we're at. She's like, really, we need to go to St. Francis, go to the hospital. Right. So, the hospital that we need to go to is about 4 miles away. So not super far. And she was not feeling the urge to push. Right. So she was completely dilated. He was low, but she hadn't been bearing down with contractions or anything like that.
That's good.
And so the midwife gave them the option, do you want to drive there or do you want to call an ambulance? And I think a lot of this was well, you have your RV. I know there's a place for you to park your RV here. I don't know how that's going to be, at the hospital. And so they chose to call an ambulance. And in the meantime, her husband had called somebody they know who is a spinning babies trainer in another area of the country to check in and be like, no, but really, is there anything we could do? And that person also was like, no,
that's
you have to do.
That's so
else.
interesting. Yeah. And I have two reactions to that. Mm-hmm. One is they were educated, but they also didn't understand that really at that point, there isn't anything you can really do. This baby's coming. So then, therefore, they're reaching out for just that last landline of hope. But as I would hope that, on the other hand, that they trusted that their midwife would do anything that she could do. Yeah. She would have done something. So I wonder if that was a little stab in their midwife's heart, well, didn't you trust me enough to know that wasn't the case? But I hope her ego also was able to handle that. Yeah. Oh,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm sure she felt that to some extent. I mean, I felt that a little bit, just to be totally frank and honest about it. It's I'm not a spinning babies trainer, but I do use it all the time. Right. And the thing is this is a very specific set of circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also felt so grateful that they had that person and did think to call them because I could tell that once they got that from, second or third source, it was sort of okay.
That's what they needed. Yeah.
Now that's what they needed to feel, to feel that they'd exhausted their options.
Exactly. Because maybe later they would have
navigated that.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. What if that person had said, well, I think even if it wasn't going to work, that would plague them. So they made the decision to go by ambulance.
Yeah. So they made the decision to go by ambulance.
I'm sorry. Let me ask you real quick again.
Go right ahead.
How were they handling this other than questioning the spinning babies aspect of it? This was going, emotionally, how was she specifically handling it? How were they handling it?
She was pretty panicked, I would say. Because I think, just as anyone who has a very precipitous labor, in my experience in those moments, it's what it looks like to me from the outside with any very fast labor is so much stuff is happening and your brain is wait, I can't catch up. Right.
Exactly.
And so you're just, it's I say this to my students all the time. People are we do this exercise where we talk about if we could have everything we wanted, what would we want from our birth, and people say all the time, a fast birth. Yeah. I'm always I get you. And also fast births, I think, are hard.
Yeah. Well, and hard to integrate. I've always said that, having had some, they're very hard. And
from experience.
Yeah. And I've been with people too. So I do. And I know there's never a right length of time for a labor. How about that?
Of course. Yeah. Right. It's not one or the other. It's just something to think about. So I think she was having that. And then I think on top of that, I'm remembering now that she did have her first child in the hospital, but she had also been planning an out of hospital birth in that experience as well. And that labor had been very, very long. And then, so that was part of the transfer. So I think, it was overwhelming in terms of the speed of the labor. And then I think too, there was the this is coming up again, even though circumstances are totally different. So I think that's kind of where the panic and the struggle,
which is totally understandable. On top of it, was she concerned? Was there conversation about, well, who's going to be doing this delivery, and will it have to be a cesarean, or will I still be able to have vaginal delivery?
Yeah. So they did ask questions of the midwife of like, are there other midwives that could come and do this vaginally? Could we have is there somebody you can call? Is there something you could do? And her midwife said, listen, there are 2 midwives in the city that have done vaginal breech births, a couple times each. One of them has a little bit more experience because she's done that work as part of mission work that she's done elsewhere. But she said, I think given some specific, medical stuff that had gone on with her previous baby, and given the size of this baby that they were estimating, she was like, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's what we should do. And I, she's like, I could call them, but I think we're still in a situation like we need to be moving more quickly. And I know I don't have the skills for this, and I don't know that we can get you what you need in time. Right. Even if those were possible, even if I had a great option for you here. And I always,
I so respect what that midwife was saying, and other people listening may not agree with this, but with how she handled it, like, well, why didn't she, if that was a potential? But given the circumstances of speed, for one, I would agree. But also, this is something I think we've discussed has come up in our workshops. It's like, for her to call in a midwife who has no relationship, I think is really asking a hell of a lot of that person, that midwife, because she's putting her livelihood on the line with somebody that she has no relationship. So I'm not sure it's a fair question.
And it's different than this is coming.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
It's like somebody has to make a split-second decision of whether or not they're going to do this thing that really they're not well protected.
Right.
Which I know none of us want to be thinking about.
No.
That as the primary thing, but it, like you said, it is someone's livelihood, and it is part of the, perhaps part of what's going into the thinking.
So she knew that there was no option in that aspect.
Yeah. So then, as we were waiting for the ambulance to come, she did start to feel some urges to push. And so, it was kind of like, I think I remember her midwife saying something like, I don't want to get you pushing. Like, I don't want to, get you actively pushing here, but do what you need to do, right? Like, work with this how you need to work with this. So we had, we helped stand her up, and we were waiting in the living room, which is right by the front door of the birth center. And I remember we had Chuck's pads sort of like laid out all over the place, and she was sort of, sometimes halfway sitting or kneeling on the couch, and sometimes standing up. And really it was probably just, 5 or 6 minutes at most before the ambulance got there. But it was a very surreal, for me, it was a surreal experience of time sort of stretching out. And, and I think, it had never occurred to me that I haven't done a ton of home births. Most of my experience has been in the hospital, but this was by far not my first out of hospital, birth experience. And I honestly think it had never crossed my mind that a transfer could be that quick. Do you know what I mean? That we could, that the need to go in could be that quick and at that point. in the labor. So I was providing a lot of physical support to her at that time. She had one of her arms, over my shoulders, helping to hold her up. And then also I'm thinking, because I knew, of course, she was thinking, but it was also, of course, there were other things taking her immediate attention.
Right.
I'm thinking, we're not taking the RV. Her son is asleep in the RV. Her son's like 4 years old, I think. And so, the midwife and the assistant had just gotten in, and me and her husband were all sort of, trying to support her a lot, and also communicate with each other about what happens next and what needs to be done. And, do we have all the things that we need? And, the midwife making sure that she has the files. And, I'm trying to make sure that I'm trying to remember, did we bring anything in from her, from her RV that we need to make sure we take out at this point? And just thinking through all those things. So when there was actually 2 sets of responders that came, and the first ones were not with the ambulance. So they were, I don't remember what department they were from, but they had some sort of medical, involvement, but they weren't with the ambulance. And so they were very confused, that first pair. It was like saying that she's fully dilated and breached. It was like, it didn't make any sense to them somehow. And so that was really, it was weird. It was
glad
like,
they were only the first responder.
Exactly. Glad we had more people. So then the second set came in, and there was one of the EMTs that was like, who totally got it and was like, okay, like, this is what, sort of helped everybody else. Like, this is what we're going to do. And the midwife was like, do any of you have any experience delivering babies? Has any of you EMTs that are going in this ambulance ever delivered a baby before? And no, none of them had. And so she said, okay, I know this might not be, standard or practice, but I think it would be a really good idea if I ride in the ambulance with her, because it's possible that this baby will be delivered en route, and, she's going to need somebody who knows what they're doing. So absolutely. That was so, such good presence of thought, right?
Yes.
So she rode with them, and they take off, and, it's so funny in those moments. There's so many things you're like, well, that will never come up. I so remember, like, I didn't have a car for years as a doula at the beginning, because I lived in a city where I really didn't need one. And I remember being like, well, I would never be in a situation where I would need to have a client in the car with me. When would I ever be driving a client around, right? And then here we are, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, needing to go 4 miles, and my clients only have an RV. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to leave her husband and her kid, to wait for a taxi or something. You know what I mean?
Right,
it was just like, we got to go. So I helped her husband get their son for dressed and in the car quite quickly. And they just, by total, it's totally weird. I have a niece who we were picking up from school a lot at the time. And so I had a booster seat that was like the right size for him in the car. It was just, it was perfect. So we just put him in the car and we took him. And then on the way there, I'm sitting there trying to think like, okay, how do I best support them? Right. So I can tell he's sort of like spinning out a little bit, thinking about logistics, and, he'll mention the insurance, and then he's mentioning what's going to happen with their son and like all of this different stuff. And so I just, in that like 5-minute car ride, I'm like, okay, let's talk about what you can expect when we get there. And then let's make a decision about how you want to deal with childcare right now. Right. Right. Good. They had just moved to our city like a few months before. They didn't have any real friends or family in town. They had a couple of neighbors, but, those people are like across town now. So, I strongly suspected that they would put her under general anesthesia. I knew that it was very, very likely that they would be doing a cesarean. And I knew that she had her midwife with her, and I knew that in this hospital they would let the midwife go with her into the OR. Oh, that's great. And she also had hired a birth photographer who was also a doula. And this hospital in particular has a reputation for allowing birth photographers in the room, but not doulas. So I knew that she would likely be able to have. You've got to be kidding. I know. I've actually been able to get into the OR several times at different hospitals by asking if I could take pictures for them. And I swear I'll be using an iPhone, and it's like that lets me get in when just being there as a doula, but not let me get in. But
Work to be done. Yeah, work to be done. Okay.
Yeah, work to be done. Exactly. So basically I knew, like, okay, I know that her midwife will go in. I know that she'll likely have this person who's not the person she hired as her doula, but who also is a doula, who's able to be there with her. And I know that they have this very real need for somebody to watch their child, right? And so I said to him, I'm here for whatever you guys need me for. Of course, I'm here to go into the OR with you if they will let me, and that's something that you and she want. But if it would be more helpful for you right now for me to, hang out with your kid in the waiting room until we know where, what your room is and all of that, I'm happy to do that as well. And it's just like this sense of relief on his face of like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't have, I could tell he was like, what are we going to do? Where's he going to go?
Right.
So I ended up, I dropped him off at the entrance where he could go right. The husband, where he could go right back, to where they were, and then
were they taking them into the emergency room or to L&D?
They did take him in through. They took her in through the emergency room,
right?
And then they ended up. It was like the ambulance beat us by 5 or 10 minutes because we had to go and get the son out of the car or out of the RV. And it ended up being a thing where they had gone in through the ER. I'm trying to think of how I knew that. I think that I knew that because the midwife texted me. But when I dropped him off and they ended up making him go back around and go in through the normal entrance that you would use with labor and delivery. But he, once he got out there, they like very quickly ushered him in, and then, I was just with her son. So I took him to the waiting room, and I had my big, rebozo in my bag, and I pulled it out, and it was like he knew something crazy was going on. He's 4 years old, so he knows something's going on, but he doesn't totally get it. And so I just asked him if he wanted to like lay back down and go to sleep for a little bit. And we found a sort of more of like a couch type of, seat than a chair. And so he was able to sort of curl up next to me, and I covered him up with a rebozo, and we just kind of were there for a little while.
And were anybody communicating with you during that time? I mean, did they know you were out there? No. So for about
half an hour, her husband knew I was out there, and I had texted both the photographer and the midwife to say, this is where I am. Let me know. Yeah. Let me know what's going on, or when they get moved into or whatever. Like, let me know when the next thing happens.
And was this hard for you, Anne, to be?
Yeah, it was so hard.
Yeah. Because I would be like, oh, it would be so hard. Knowing that it was the right thing that needed to be done for the moment, but like, no, this is reason why childcare is so important.
Yes.
Like, I was not hired to be a childcare person, but I'm glad I'm here to take care of their child.
Well, that was exactly it. It's like, and I have this conversation with clients who have older kids. They want to be part of the birth. And honestly, it has informed so much about my practice, right? Because it's like, no one saw this coming. No one saw this coming.
Exactly.
I'm sure that baby had been breached, or, who knows? I don't know if it had been.
Right.
There's reasons that I have not yet shared that I think that baby had been breached for a while. But we weren't prepared, and, we weren't planning on that, and certainly weren't seriously thinking, honestly, about, having to transfer. And it's like they had a whole system worked out that was going to be just fine if we didn't have to go someplace.
Right.
And we had to go someplace. And now, we have these other needs. So, the birth photographer also showed up right when they were getting into the ambulance, and she basically just got right back in her car and followed them. If she had been there a little bit earlier, we might have made different decisions about, who was where,
who was
when,
important
and all of that.
To be where. Yeah.
On the flip side, I know that they really treasure the pictures that she took. So, I don't mean to.
No, I get what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah. But you're right. It was really hard, both on the level of, yes, I knew they needed this. They needed somebody to do this thing, right? And it was like, who else was going to? It felt very much like no one else was going to step up for this. And I think what I felt in the moment was like, it's more important for her husband to be there and to be, if she is under general anesthesia, to be able to hold their baby and all of this, than for me to be there, in this situation. And I don't know. It felt like the only decision to make at the time. And
right. Well, and like you said, you saw that the partner was so relieved at that moment.
Yeah.
Like, okay, take that. And, the role of the doula is unexpected as well. What we do end up supporting. I mean, you believe in that you're going to be there for the birth, but I had a circumstance one time as well where it was a decision for the home birth transfer in, and it wasn't via ambulance, it was a drive, but it was important that they leave and go, and they had a sleeping child as well, and the plan had been that they would call somebody if the child woke up, they would call a neighbor who would come over, or a friend or somebody not real close by. Anyway, when it came time to leave, it was like, oh. So I stayed because until their person arrived. And then by that point, by the time I got to the hospital, the baby was born, but that was okay. Yeah. I mean, they went with the midwife. They didn't go without support. It was just, I remember that feeling like, damn, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm missing what I'm supposed to be doing. But it was all, that was the reason I was there, though, in the end. So that they were so relieved that they could leave and know that their child was safe. So.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I remember sitting in that waiting room and I was like, I don't even know, is the baby born? Did the baby, was the baby delivered on the way to the hospital?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was it vaginal? How did so what happened next?
So then, after I'd been in the waiting room with her son 30 or 40 minutes, something like that, her husband texted me and said, baby was born at this time. I think he even said, weighs this much. And then was like, they're moving her into this room and, I'll come out and see you guys in just a minute or something like that. So, I was like, that's great. Here's where we are. And so he came out a few minutes later and had taken a bunch of pictures on his phone, of the baby, and was showing me the pictures and crying. It was very, very sweet, and he's like waking his son up real gently to tell him. And I'm just like, this is awesome, but like,
I'm thinking the same thing.
What's going on with her?
Let me just get back there, please.
Exactly. I'm like, clearly everybody's like safe, but like now I need to know how she's feeling. So it turns out that the anesthesiologist, which I think this is so amazing, when they came in, they were like, basically, the OB and whatever were sort of like, here we go. And he said, give me 2 minutes. I believe I can get her set up that we don't have to put her under general anesthesia. I don't want to put her under general anesthesia.
That's great.
And he did. He was able to first chance very quick. I mean, he just was awesome. Just like, got this. I don't remember if it was a spinal or an epidural or what,
sure,
but made it happen very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I went back into her room, which they moved her afterwards, like for recovery at this hospital, they put you into a labor room. So you go, from the OR briefly to like a recovery area, and then you're back in a labor and delivery room. And so I went in there, and the midwife was in there, and the assistant was in there, and the birth photographer was in there. And it was just like, she had all these women around her, which did make me feel very, relieved just on the level of like, she's not alone, right? Like she wasn't just sort of alone. And then this was the point, the midwife was really, she was holding the baby, and the midwife was showing her, sort of doing, I think, exactly what this midwife does every time a baby's born, really showing her baby. I don't know exactly what I mean. She was pointing out that he had a specific type of head molding that made her think that he had been breached for a while. And the way the back of his head was molded, it sort of seemed to her like he would have been right up underneath her ribs and just had been breached for a while. And she also was, telling her that she was like, I didn't know this at the time, but like seeing this head molding, she's like, I think it was the right thing for him to be, for him to be born by cesarean, basically. So she was saying, she was sort of talking her through that stuff. And, my client was, I remember when she first saw me and like I came over to her bed, she was like looking me in the eyes, and she was just like, oh my gosh, like just like, what just happened,
Right.
And she had already started to, she was already holding him skin to skin. He was starting to, show some signs of being interested in nursing. And she had nursed her older son. And so she didn't need a lot of help, basically, to get started. But I sort of stood there with her as she started, with breastfeeding and everything. And then so what I ended up doing, so it was like from the time that I first saw them until that moment was probably about an hour and a half total. Might have even been a little bit less than that. And so it was just a whirlwind,
right,
leading up to the baby being born. And so I ended up staying with them postpartum for like about 5 hours, I want to say, which is, much longer than my norm,
right,
for sure.
And you did that because? Well,
first of all, because now their RV is at the birth center, and their car is at, their where they live, like all the way across town. And so her husband, after like she was settled and, everything, it was like, well, we don't have anything for our kid. Our 4-year-old
right.
has nothing to keep him, keep him busy. We don't have any of our, they went there without a single thing,
Sure.
Like they had her purse. They didn't have anything. And so the midwife and the assistant left about 2 hours postpartum, and they were going to go back to the birth center. And so he was like, well, can we ride with you, back to the birth center? And then I can take the RV back across town, and then I can get the car and, come back up here. So, it felt like a good thing to me at that point to stay with her
definitely.
while they did that, because that thought of like, I don't want her to be alone.
Well, and so good. See how the role of the doula again evolves into
exactly.
You would have stayed, period, but not maybe for this long of time.
Yeah.
You would have left when the midwife and the assistant left, probably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But knowing that he was going to leave, I just was like,
sure.
in a sensitive way, it wasn't like, there's no way I'm leaving, but like, would it be helpful to you if I stayed? And yes, very much. She was like, that would be really great. So we ended up, I think the midwife left and the assistant left actually before she was moved to postpartum, and her, her husband and her son. So me and the birth photographer actually stayed with her until she got moved to postpartum. And then, around that time, they realized that the birth photographer realized that she hadn't taken any pictures of all of them as a family together. So we both ended up staying with her for a few hours until they came back. I think he was gone probably about an hour and a half. So when they came back, the birth photographer took some pictures of all of them, and then she left. And then I think I stayed another 45 minutes or so after that, and just making sure like everybody was settled.
Right.
There's a lot of pictures of me with her brushing her hair. She had this beautiful long, hair, and she had gotten in the shower right before I had showed up at her RV. And so her hair was wet, and then she never put it back. And so, she'd been through all of this, and her hair was just like so tangled,
Oh, God.
And even starting in the labor and delivery room, it's like, can I help you brush your hair? Like, I don't know. It just felt like, I don't want to leave you. And then you're just like, I figured out how to brush your hair, and I just had surgery and like all of this. So anyway, that was part of what I did with her postpartum as well. But we just, honestly, we talked back through what had just happened probably 2 or 3 times, in that couple of hours.
And how do you think that was helpful to her to be able to talk it back and forth like that, especially immediately? I think so.
Yeah, it was very much me following her lead.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like what she needed. I said that thing about, I feel like, especially those fast births, it's like your brain can't kind of integrate what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely don't typically talk about somebody's birth immediately after it happened.
Right.
That's usually a postpartum visit thing, but, at the time it was like, and it wasn't telling the whole story. It was very different, but just, it's like I could see that these moments would sort of come back to her, and she would tell me what she had experienced. And then sometimes she would be like, well, I remember this, but it doesn't make sense. Like what was happening there, that kind of a thing. So we were just sort of talking back through those types of details. And I do think it helped her map her experience. You know what I mean? To have
so.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. We don't normally go through all the details of somebody's labor right after they've given birth.
Right.
Though there are individuals who want more details, right after their birth, for numerous different reasons. But I would think in a circumstance like this, not only that it was happening so fast, but that it became such an unexpected experience. Not only is it a hospital, a birth center to hospital transfer, it's a breach that's not expected. And guess what? You're also going to have a cesarean. I mean, that's a lot for some. And now you have a brand new baby in your arms, and you just had a cesarean, and you were in labor. I think it makes sense. And probably, I don't know, do you think that helped her in the long run in her postpartum to be able to deal with her experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I hope so, obviously. She had a hard postpartum, as is not surprising. She had a rough time, we were, in touch, and then she would be out of touch for a few days, for several weeks. It might have been up to a month before we actually had our postpartum visit, which again is so out of the normal for what I.
But you were in touch with each other during that period of time.
We were in touch, and there would be periods of time where I wouldn't hear back from her for a day or two.
Right.
And sometimes it would be, when she did get back in touch, I just, had my phone broke, or I wasn't paying attention to my phone, or, different things.
Right.
But I think that it, and I feel very understanding of this. I think that even talking through those things, which, I really, if I think about when we did see each other for our postpartum visit, I know there are things that we talked about there where, she basically was, referring back to stuff that we had talked about right after the birth. And, I do think it helped. I think it was just going to be a hard time no matter what. And I think that there were going to be, questions and things that felt what am I trying to say?
Unsettled?
Yeah, unsettled, unresolved.
Well, did she, I guess what I'm trying to understand about her, and what I'm trying to understand about the experience for her is, I mean, I think that it's so hard for somebody to handle the unexpected no matter what.
Yeah.
And I think when it is a circumstance of a transfer is always going to be difficult.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And then the breach is another thing, and the cesarean is another thing. I mean, I think she was having to deal with a lot of different things. Did she show that initially, besides just kind of, trying to figure it out? Did she, I don't want to assign that she should have felt sad or felt angry or anything, but I hope she was feeling joy just having her baby, period. But was she exhibiting other emotions?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I would say that she was. I think there was the sort of bewilderment or even disbelief that was more than just this is a lot to integrate. It was sort of how did this happen?
Yeah.
How did all of this happen?
Right. And then in the postpartum, when you did finally actually connect physically with her, what was that like? How was she?
She was careful is the word that I'm that's coming to mind for me. I think that she was, we had a visit scheduled that then she had put off about a week. So by the time I, saw her, like I said, it was about a month postpartum. And we had a couple of, false starts essentially to meeting up. So, I think that, and we did have a conversation. Like I said, I know it was a lot of relief for her husband that I stayed with her, with her son, during the birth. But she did bring up to me at the postpartum visit that, basically that she wished I could have been, actually there for the birth and with her in the hospital before he was born. I think it was really chaotic and really, of course, really chaotic and just, although she had these other support people with her, and I think like during the still in labor and before the baby was born, her midwife and her photographer were with her, but her photographer really didn't fill in a doula way at all at that point. She really, did just keep taking pictures, and then her midwife was providing her with some support, but also her attention was very, also being asked for by the care providers,
Right. So she was missing that component of you.
Yes, exactly.
But she understood why. Did she know right from the beginning did she understand right from the beginning why you were not there, that you were with their child?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know.
Yeah, because that would be weird if, what happened to Anne? Yeah. But I would hope that somebody would have informed her of that. But I get that feeling that she has. And
me too.
Yeah, how did that... So what was your feeling in the end around all of this as well, as far as the experience?
Yeah. Well, I did really... I was immediately after, like I said, I felt at the moment, and I still feel like I don't know what else. There didn't seem to be any other options presenting themselves in terms of, childcare. And so it did feel like, well, this is a very serious need that, we have to meet. This has to be met. Like a 4-year-old can't, just be left somewhere alone. But, at the time and still lingering in some ways, I do have questions about, should I have pushed them more or been more insistent, prenatally, that they have a plan for his care.
So what do you think about, what's your answer now? Because now you've had time.
Yeah. My answer
not that you should do it different with them, but for your your clients. Has this impacted your conversations?
It has impacted my conversations. I don't share details, but I do say, I've been in a situation before, for the most part, things don't happen in a split second, where suddenly we don't have any time. But sometimes they do, right? So I say, I've been in a situation where we had a strategy, or the clients had a strategy set up for childcare that worked fine. But then when a very different decision had to be made about the labor, it didn't work anymore. And so I ended up, becoming that childcare. And I said, that's really not what I'm here for. And if I'm doing that, then I'm not able to provide you the things that you have hired me for. So, I need you to be thoughtful about what are your contingency plans here.
That's good, because I think that's so important. And it's not that you did it wrong the first time around.
No, but it's just you just learn new things. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And because I just had this conversation with a pregnant woman a week ago or so and she's planning a home birth, and her husband is really going to be the childcare person, which I don't think is a great idea, but but based on what they're talking about, she feels like he's not emotionally attached. She loves him to death. They're a great couple together. But as far as labor, she doesn't need him, and he'd be more comfortable not being needed, it sounds like. But what I had to bring up was, there was more that I brought up, which was maybe this is a time where you guys could figure that space together. But putting that aside, I said, you are planning to birth at home, and what if there is a need to transfer into the hospital? Then is your husband going to stay home and you go to the hospital? And she was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I said, well, that's, and I said, and it's not the job of the midwife or the assistant there. They'll of course embrace your child into the circumstances, but that's not their job. You need to figure out who will be on call for you in case something changes, or your husband is really needed during the labor. Because I've been at labors where We have actually had to pull in that person, like, we need your strength, we need your arms, we need your body, we need, you don't have a choice here. You're involved in this birth,
We literally need you. Yep.
So I think, for our listeners, the reason I'm going on, it's something that we really need to know, because this happened to be birth center planned, but you could be laboring at home with somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And you might suddenly have to leave. And what is the plan here, Yeah. So, I think it's a really good conversation that you have. And, we learn, this is important. It may never be needed again.
Right. It may never come up again.
But I'm carrying that with me now.
Absolutely. But it's made me, I looked into it made me really look into what are professional resources for this in our community. Who are there on-call nanny services? Are there sibling doulas? And it's, yes, there are.
Yeah.
And they may not be everywhere, but there may be. And so, looking that up and having an awareness of that. We couldn't have called them in without, a plan ahead of time in that circumstance. But it has given me resources to share with clients prenatally to say, if you don't have friends and family who are here, or if you have a family member who's coming in from out of town, but then you have your baby after that person has to go back home, here's a backup plan. Here's somebody else you can turn to.
And I guess what would have happened had you not been there and the photographer, I guess then her husband would have had to deal with his son on his own and gone to the hospital and, missed the birth and, whatever. And that's the other point of explanation. We don't want that to be your experience,
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
And, for you, to me, what it sounds like, and you did a great job of supporting these people as far as keeping calm and preparing, and that that ride to the hospital with her husband, with her partner and the son, was so great that you were able to give him more information too, besides here, I'll take care of your child, but more like, here's what to expect and those kinds of things. I know that grounded him in some way, because can you imagine him otherwise, like, in his head, driving, trying to figure this out and worried, and there was you were that calm in the storm. And we always say doulas aren't just for the laboring person. They're for the partner, very much so, and for whomever else. We're collaborators, but it sounded, and what I like also, which is, we already discussed, is hard, is you let your ego go for the time period of, okay, I will become childcare provider. This is not my job. This is not my job. And I want to be in there and I want to know what's going on. Yeah. But you didn't get stuck in that, because what could have easily been done is you could have just not offered. You could have just not put it out there, and you might have been asked, but you might not have been asked. And I've seen people do that, where they just stand quiet. Not under circumstances like this, but I've seen people when there's help needed and there's people standing around and nobody responds. And then you feel like, well, I have to respond. I'd like to be one of those people who doesn't respond sometime and just keep my mouth shut. Be that one that just holds out. But you
clearly we don't have that practice.
But you didn't let your ego get in the way. And then what I like also is that you really gave the time to that woman after her birth, that I think you would have stayed longer anyway, just because to help assimilate everything. But it was so important that she not be left alone. That would have been just so terrible to me. That she went through this unexpected event, totally different than what she had in her mind, totally different. And disappointed also that she ended up a second time. I can't help but to say that without knowing this person. She had to have felt disappointed, like, damn, I tried this one other time and it didn't work out. And, the doubt about that. And you were there to be able to hold that space for her that long, that period of time. And though ideally we like people to, follow up as quickly as possible physically, you were in touch and you were allowing her also to, do whatever it was she needed to do until it was time for you to reconnect. But you didn't let it was a month later, but you still did it, and she still needed it. Were there any questions, and we're going to have to wrap this up in a second, but were there any questions in her mind, your mind, anybody's explanation or anything about why if this baby indeed had been in breech position, why that wasn't known?
I know we talked very briefly about that at some point. I remember her saying that, palpation wise, it had not been caught. And her midwife, didn't push her to or insist on her having an ultrasound at the end of her pregnancy. She had been receiving prenatal care with out-of-hospital midwives elsewhere, and then I'm trying to remember how far along she was when she moved to town, but in her third trimester. So she hadn't been seeing this midwife, for too terribly long. And her midwife certainly didn't, offered but did not push at all for her to have, an ultrasound. And, I remember her saying, basically, if she had pushed, I would have been pissed. I wasn't going to do that. I didn't want to do that.
Right. Well, and there's no reason to have an ultrasound at the end unless there's a good reason to have an ultrasound at the end.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there's suspicion that the baby's in breech, then it might be warranted, so that there might be time then to get that baby to rotate. Yeah. But other than that, why would we do it? There are other reasons, but I would hope she wouldn't be just routinely. But it's not like that. Yeah. Right.
And this is actually, I actually had early on in my doula career another client who was with midwives at a birth center in my old town, and had not had an ultrasound after 20 weeks, and it was discovered in labor for her as well that her baby was breech.
It happens. It
does happen.
It's just. What happens is people go, well, why wasn't it, diagnosed? Why wasn't it assessed? And, I have been there with the most experienced person who, and then we arrive at the home birth, and the first thing that is done is, let's check her and see what's happening. And the baby's in breech. And it's hard to believe that midwife could have missed. A breech. Did the baby change, or was it just really hard to tell the difference with this baby? And that was because she was confused, the midwife herself, I swear the baby was head down. And I trust her that the baby was head down. But so did the baby rotate it right at the end? Could have done that. Babies have done that. I've been there in labor where we were able to move the baby into breech, into vertex. But, that's not, it was only because that's another story that I think I've told. But that is not something that really is going to happen. This was just extenuating circumstances. So for you, for me, it sounds like, I am just really glad you were there, period. I just think you fulfilled such a role that, and I think it's a good story also, that we don't know exactly what our role is going to be in a birth. Yeah. We just any more than the person who is laboring knows what their labor is going to be like. Yeah. And we have the vision, we have experience, and think that it's going to be a certain way, and lo and behold, often it turns itself around. And even if it's not a circumstance like this, it's like, man, I didn't know I'd be doing that, or I thought I'd be doing so much more. And yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think I've been having this conversation a lot with my wife recently of just, it's so funny, especially now that I'm a childbirth educator, people will ask me in class or after class, well, who really needs a doula? Like, do I really need a doula? Like, we're planning a home birth, or we're planning this, or we have all of this support. And like, do we really need a doula? And, on the one hand, I'm like, maybe not. But on the other hand, you have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
We don't know. Like we're planning for one thing, and then what actually happens is a whole other ball of wax sometimes. And it's like, I feel like, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. That you're glad that I was there. I feel that way too. And I hope it comes across like very much without ego. I feel like I just think it's a good idea to have a non-clinical support person available for you, because maybe your labor goes super smoothly and your doula is just there and, saying encouraging words, and that's everything that she's doing. And still that's still a lot. But yeah, there's so many, over 50 births. It's like, there's so many things that we end up doing that nobody knew ahead of time they were going to need. You know?
Exactly. And also, if you choose the right, and this is the thing, the conversation with your childbirth students is choosing the right person.
Yes.
To come with you. That doula, don't just choose any doula, choose the right one, because even if that ends up you don't need, like in the home birth situation, even if you don't quote unquote need them, they will be a person present in the room that you're glad is there. That is not an intervention in any way. So, better to have one extra positive person there who may end up being intricately involved in everything. But maybe they are more on the periphery, but that's okay as long as it's someone that you're glad is there, period, because you have a connection. Well, and, the last thing about the undetermined breech, I think what I have had experiences through the years with people who have had unexpected position of baby unassessed, not assessed, is some of them have been really upset about it. Like, why wasn't this known? Why? Because if it had been, maybe I could have gotten the baby to change, and they really spin on that. Was this woman like that at all? She didn't express a lot of that postpartum. I would imagine that it was, knowing her and knowing the conversations that we had both prenatally and postpartum around other things, I would not doubt that crossed her mind, but it did not seem to be a huge thing that she was, she didn't talk about it. She didn't sort of bring that up as a specific. Well, that's good, and it's not something that you can necessarily bring up either, because you don't want to create a situation.
We don't need to enter that.
I would hope that the conversation was such, and I believe it would be with you, where she knew that was, she could discuss that if that were something on her mind. Yeah. Well, Anne, I want to really thank you for all the time that you've given to us in these conversations about your work and how you're balancing it out as a doula and all the other jobs, besides the fact that we didn't even mention that you have a personal life, which is a whole nother conversation. It sounds like that all you do, your life is just this, and this.
It's very full.
Yes. And, sharing that birth, because I do think it's a great example of unexpected event, that everything turned out great in the end, but that there are twists not only for the family, but for you as well. And how do we handle them, and how do we get through them, and what do we learn from them? If there's something to be learned, and how do we apply that for our future clients? So, it's very well rounded, and I really, really appreciate your time today talking to us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for listening.